Let's set the scene. One man, trying a bit too much, wearing a Panama hat, finds a shiny gold Mastercard in the gift shop of the Nashville airport. So boarding pass in one hand, card in the other. He squints at the name. Nancy Lee. Seems like a pretty nice person. He tucks the card into his front pocket, saunters into the gift shop, first getting gift cards for all his friends, then getting some moonshine, some high-end bourbon. The card goes through. Approval. Calling himself Captain Reese, by the way. Not a real captain. Captain Reese grins. I earned this, he mumbles smugly. Yeah, I'm so generous, he proclaims, like he's trying to convince himself. Now, plane lands in Tampa from Nashville, and Captain Reese is strutting into the Seascape Four Meridians Resort, made up hotel, by the way. Taps the marble counter and says, I'd like 8 waterside view rooms for me and the rest of Flight 437. That's the whole plane, the clerk either proclaims or asks. Yeah, you bet. I'm in a given mood. I'm so generous. Next stop, Waterside Steakhouse. Let's start with the tasting menu, starting from 2A to 37C. Don't skip the pilot, but as this is occurring, something else is happening 1,000 miles away inside a Mastercard data center in O'Fallon, Missouri, which is just outside St. Louis. The fraud engine watching in silence, detachment, but maybe an eyebrow raised. A risk score has surged to 0.93. It doesn't match Nancy Lee at all, the actual cardholder. Nancy Lee is an elementary school teacher from Seattle who's allergic to shellfish, doesn't drink, and has never been to Tampa. What is the system flagging? It's flagging there's a location jump from Nashville to Tampa. There's a purchasing tempo that's more like a shopping spree than a lifestyle. There's a new Android phone that's never been paired with this card before. And there's a Captain Reese booking under a new merchant ID previously linked to fraud in Tampa. The waiter now returns, awkwardly smiling, wishing that they had taken this day off. Sir, your card has been declined. Mastercard is requesting a call-in verification. Captain Reese blinks, thinks about performing crying act or starting to scream incoherently. Now, he decides to say, guess you changed your mind. So he eases back toward the hotel lobby, trying to make his exit, and everyone in the plane is asking where he's going. 2 security guards know exactly where he's going. They're already converging. Meanwhile, Nancy Lee in Seattle has landed safely. Nancy Lee's phone is buzzing. And the question that it asks on the text is, did you attempt to book 8 hotel rooms and a $4,900 dinner in Tampa? She taps no. And with Mastercard's decision intelligence system, closes the loop. The risk has been flagged. They've recalibrated trust with the user. The fraud has been stopped before it became a financial issue. Or dinner service for 150 plus confused passengers. Captain Reese may be a character. This story is fictional. But the real story here is something that is fast, it is structured, it is a system that is built on judgment and probability, not on punishment or on accusation. It's built to protect, arguably. So in 2011, when you misplaced your wallet, it was more than missing an ID. It was like you were losing part of your experience on your trip, okay? If you're on a trip. So you were kind of strutting about with that strip of magnetic tape that is easy to copy, that's hardly encrypted, and yet is still the reigning champion in US credit cards. Before the EMV was mandatory in all retail credit and all credit card transaction terminals, there was the magnetic stripe. Thin, dark band laminated onto the back of every card. It is a magnetized tape. It's encoded like a cassette with the account number, the expiration date, and the verification song etched into the tape itself like a song that keeps replaying over and over again. This is a good metaphor to describe how it works. So the magnetic stripe on the back of your old credit card is quite literally a piece of magnetized tape. It's not that all different from what you'd find on a cassette or VHS tape, and it's technically the truth. I'm not trying to be like nostalgic here. The stripe contains tiny magnetic particles that are embedded into the plastic film. And so when the card is swiped, the card reader's magnetic head, just like one in a cassette deck, scans the stripe and reads the data stored in 3 tracks. The data includes your account number, the expiration date, and a simple checksum. Later comparisons can be made to detect errors in the data though. All this is static though. It's written once by your bank, it never changes. And this is if you have this magnetic cassette tape that plays the same song every time you swipe it, it's going to be predictable, it's going to be repeatable, and it's going to be easy to copy. EMV chips, or Europay, MasterCard, and Visa chips, which were initially introduced in the 1990s and adopted in much of Europe by the mid 2000s. On the other hand, are like the synthesizer that composes a new track every time you press play. It generates a unique cryptographic code for each transaction, a song that's never been heard before and it can't be replayed. EMV is global standard for smart chip payment cards and terminals, which have replaced the older magnetic stripe systems. I'm going to give you a technical overview real quick. First of all, they were developed in the 90s. They were widely adopted in Europe in the mid 2000s. The US is one of the last developed markets to adopt EMVs. They embed a microchip processor into the card itself. This creates a unique transaction code for every purchase, unlike the static data that is on a magnetic stripe. And that makes it extremely difficult to clone or to copy a card and reuse stolen data. Because every time you're swiping it, it's essentially playing a new song each time, a song that is going to be recreated the next time. Have a shift coming due to the increases in fraud, understandably so, because the technology is very outdated and cards are very easy to replicate. Because the data never changed, fraud was easy. People with skimmers, devices that are really as small as a stick of gum, from my understanding anyway of it, you could copy your card at an ATM machine or at a gas station, and they would encode that data onto the blank card, and then go buy everyone a dinner at that steakhouse, or go buy them a waterside room. The more they spread, the more exploitable. So once you swipe it, what would happen? Well, a POS system would dial out, literally in the years of modems, to the merchant acquirer networks. Think about like Chase or First Data. And from there, it flowed through the payment rail to the card network, Mastercard, and then finally to the issuing bank. And all of this happened in about less than 15 seconds. It was longer in the 1980s, faster by the 2000s. You're swiping it, your issuing bank will check the available balance or the credit line, fraud flags, although these were deeply antiquated in form by the early 2000s, and your daily spending limits. Then it returned an authorization code, which the terminal printed or stored. No dynamic challenge, no geolocation, just a quick, is there enough money? Yes, okay. The money, though, hasn't moved yet. What happens is at the end of the day, basically, it's a batch clearing, or what's called a batch clearing. The merchant closes the batch. A digital file of approval transactions is then transmitted to the acquirer, and the funds are transferred between banks through Mastercard's settlement engine. So every transaction during the swipe period was like sending a postcard. It was short, it was basic, it was a little bit unaware. A card was swiped, a number was read, and a request was sent into the banking network. No dynamic code, no verification question, just a thread of tape that said, I am who I say I am. Please believe me. While most of Europe and most of Asia have adopted the EMV, the snazzy little chips that flash and safeguard modern payments, the United States is falling behind. The infrastructure lags. No urgency, even though fraud seems to be, honestly, it seems to be a pretty urgent matter when it comes to financial institutions. Let's see what the EMV system was like, though, in 2005. Let's get into our time machine and return to 2005. It's 2005. The sky is pewter, the kind of sky that leans low and makes the midday look kind of like dusk. It's pleasant though. It's very pleasant. The air outside is clean. I'm in Sweden right now, and I step into the Cafe Saturnus, a Stockholm institution known as much for its buttery candelabrar as for its brightly colored chairs and enormous hanging globe lamps. The cafe is humming, not loudly, but comfortably layered, with the sounds of clinking saucers and in Swedish quiet conversations in Swedish, and the hiss of an espresso machine. At the window table, a patron is scrolling through their iPod mini, toggling through their 10 tracks they just downloaded excitedly through the iTunes Music Store, reading a well-thumbed pocketbook. Near near the counter, a small stand displays a dog-eared IKEA catalog, and next to a wire rack of postcards has a moose and a snow scene and minimalist kitchens, and I order in my best Swedish, but non-accented, in Cannabule Ocean Cafe, tak. And the barista nods. No mention of the payment yet. They just kind of like casually gesture to the Genico chip reader. It's seamless. It's routine. I insert the card. She asks, hardened chip? Just the stripe. She nods, switches modes on the machine. The transaction takes maybe a little bit longer. Still works though, not effortlessly. Not like it did for the person before me, who just tapped in the 4-digit pin and slipped in and was sipping their lingonberry soda by the time I got my receipt. What was happening here? I had a magnetic stripe on the card, and I was used to swiping because I'm from the US. In Stockholm in 2005, though, chip cards are routine. The word contactless hasn't really arrived yet, but it's already known norm, a part of daily life. It's coded into the terminals, into the expectation of the financial systems in Sweden and Stockholm. And for Mastercard, it's not a test site, it's a glimpse. It's a place where security doesn't feel like suspicion and payment is just part of the choreography of the day. Card in my wallet might feel it's a little bit behind. I start to realize in Sweden the infrastructure of trust has already been designed, deployed, and perhaps it's normalized. Paying with a card was more than normal. It was actually preferred though, because it worked, because the chip was there, the PIN was familiar, the transaction just flowed seamlessly. And for MasterCard, this was a signal, a proof that security didn't have to feel like friction, right? Like we saw with Hertz. What Stockholm had wasn't something new. It was just an alignment of something that had already been developed and deployed between the infrastructure, the behavior, and the belief. Chips stop people from copying the data. It's really what it is. That's really the draw of it in terms of fraud prevention. In O'Fallon, Missouri, they stop the improvisation, in other words, of Nancy Lee, Wood transaction network operator. They run a massive digital network that moves money between banks, merchants, and consumers. It's the pipes, not the water. Banks issue the cards, MasterCard facilitates the transaction. And they focus on security by looking at data and risk intelligent platforms, by looking at cybersecurity and ID verification, and also by partnering with governments on things like disaster relief disbursements and financial inclusion projects. They use the test, learn, scale in action, though. They pilot new fraud systems with partner banks in specific locations. In the similar way, although it's a very different industry, in a similar way to what Coca-Cola did. So consumer reactions to this are closely assessed, and they use surveys and focus groups after declines, like what made you upset? Did you lose trust in this? The behavioral insights of this are asking, do consumers prefer being asked for verification or not? So when they introduced location-based authentication, for example, through phone and GPS matches and transaction locations, MasterCard ran multi-market tests to see if people found it creepy or comforting. And these consumer insights were gathered using qualitative, ethnographic, and A/B testing as well, platforms that tracked the emotional friction that could occur. People volunteer, hopefully, for these, right? MasterCard often co-develops these tests with fintech partners, with startups. MasterCard doesn't just stop fraud, though, in this. They are telling a story also about stopping fraud. Their ad campaigns are emphasizing reliability, not fear. They're not trying to accuse someone of committing crime. Reassure, they are protecting people. You can just go about your day. If something did happen, then there are these nets in place that will catch the risk. Their fraud prevention products have names like Safety Net or Decision Intelligence, evoking a sense of trust, not command and control. MasterCard runs these pilots and experiment rollouts constantly. And they've done this in biometric payments. So they use behavioral biometric data. So they look at how you type, they look at how you move your phone. Does this payment method make sense cognitively? Does a new verification method feel secure or does it feel invasive? Do consumers understand why this is better? The adoption of these chips was propelled by the Heartland breach. The Heartland breach occurred in around May of 2008. Attackers had unauthorized access to Heartland's internal systems for several months, and this captured unencrypted card data as it moved through the processing network. Okay. At the time, Heartland Payment Systems was a major US payment processor. They handled over 1 million card transactions per month for restaurants, for retailers, for schools. In 2008, it was discovered that malware had been inserted into Heartland's processing systems, capturing payment card data in transit as it moved from merchant terminals to the card networks, Mastercard. That breach exposed over 130 million cards, including cards issued by Visa, Mastercard, American Express, and others. And the malware had evaded detection for months while it was collecting card numbers, expiration dates, and whatever other data is found on the magnetic stripe. In October of 2008, Visa and Mastercard decided to drop a little bombshell on the company of Heartland. They alerted them to some of the rather fishy transactions linked to accounts processed by Heartland with a bunch that cyber mischief was afoot. Heartland brought in cybersecurity sleuths to crack the case. Back in 2007, those pesky computers handling payment transactions fell victim to an SQL injection attack. So this is a truly a digital heist. SQL stands for structured query language. This is kind of a standard programming language that's used to manage data, retrieving and assessing data. Change the code on a web script, handing the keys of the castle right over to the attackers for a little login escapade. The attack, going undetected for months as it moved through the Heartland system, found enough data to create new physical credit cards themselves, which included the data that was encoded into the card's magnetic strip. So the outcome, the grand finale of this in 2009, those that were culpable of this were basically two partners in crime indicted on the attack. The damage was done already. Heartland lost its PCI DSS compliance for 4 months and in the process waved goodbye to hundreds of customers. The company's wallet took quite a hit as well, with a total monetary loss, which included compensating the victims of this and the soaring, so it soared past $200 million. Heartland's stock took a nosedive. It plummeted 50% in just days after the breach was revealed. I mean, it's a pretty staggering breach, though. And then it continued this dramatic descent, seeking over 77% in the following months. So it was by far, one of the most damaging publicly reported cyber attacks at the time. And so what we can glean from the attack is that despite Heartland's stumbling upon the breach in late 2008, keeping the customers in the loop with honesty and transparency, though, is the smartest strategy in this case to minimize fallout and dodge a complete nosedive in public opinion. It's not just a suggestion, right? It's actually the law, though. So organizations are now on the clock, required to spill the beans about the breaches to the public within 30 days of the discovery. So, so don't play favorites. Ensure that every system is locked down, not just those on VIP. Okay, most companies zero in on their VIP servers when it comes to IT security, as if they're the only ones that matter in the grand scheme of things, as if there are not like hundreds of millions of users who are utilizing these cards who are not part of that VIP class. And attackers are indifferent, though, to whether they waltz through a critical security server or sneak into the thermostat that controls your cozy climate. In attacks, every third party is just as equal to the next, like a game of dodgeball where everyone gets a turn to be hit. Even a third party vendor is babysitting a less critical system. Don't forget to lock the doors and check the windows in every house that you're responsible for. Let's not mix up being compliant with actually being secure either. When the breach occurred, Heartland was strutting around, all PSI, DSS compliant like, right? Sadly, though, a plethora of companies seem to think that just scraping by with the most basic compliant software, with the most minimal on clearance items, will keep their security woes at bay. Regulations like PSI, though, are a bit like a one size fits all sweater. They might keep you warm, but they definitely won't fit everyone perfectly. While compliance and security frameworks lend a helping hand. Don't forget your own IT security needs instead of like just following the tribe, because sometimes they don't know where they're going. It's like we're following someone into the wrong door while they're looking at the map upside down. Two like that are culpable for this particular breach back, almost 20 years ago now, had waltzed right into the system, enjoying a leisurely stroll undetected, all thanks to the hubris of their flimsy outward security. So who knew? Through this breach, the wisdom that Heartland gained remains as relevant as ever for any business looking to embrace fresh challenges, to be aware to inconsistencies, to not take things that seem unimportant very lightly. This prompted Mastercard and other agencies to move to chips. It's time. Chip is rolled out in the early 2010s. By 2013, banks are starting to issue dual interface cards. They have the chip and the stripe, but the merchant adoption is low at the time. And then the Target breach in December of 2013 that compromised the 40 million card users demonstrated the dangers of this again. How many more examples do you need? We have a very short memory. In 2014, the Home Depot breach occurs. That's September 2014, exposing 56 million cards. 2015, they finally said, okay, enough is enough. From this date forward, whichever party is least EMV compliant, whether it's the merchant or whether it's the issuer, is going to be liable for counterfeit fraud. To this point, so terminals are shipped but not certified, and checkout clerks tape over the chip slots with notes like swipe only, trying to catch up the best they can. And it's very seamless today. Mastercard played a role in coordinating this through their merchant education program and through the participation in the EMV migration forum. Their focus wasn't just on fraud reduction, it was also on repositioning their brand as an infrastructure partner, not just a card company. What else are they doing to provide security? We've talked about their center in O'Fallon, Missouri. Let's say that when the rollout came in 2015, fraud didn't just vanish. It moved online. It got faster. It got harder to see in the way that you could see with the magstripe cards. The chip was security at the edge, and what MasterCard really wanted was security at the center. And that center is in O'Fallon, Missouri, in St. Louis. It's not a city that most people associate with global finance, but that's all the more reason to have it there. Beneath that modest exterior is one of the most secure and consequential data facilities in the payment world. MasterCard began building here what it's called decision intelligence. And here's where the decision at the fulcrum comes in. A scoring system that evaluates every transaction in milliseconds, not just what you bought, but how, whether it matches your behavioral fingerprint, where you bought it. When Nancy Lee or Captain Reese is buying dinner for the entire plane in Tampa at a time when Nancy Lee doesn't usually go shopping in a place where Nancy Lee has ever been, they are saying, you have a high risk score right now. A risk scoring system is what they call the decision intelligence. This evaluates how does this work? MasterCard collects event level logs from every transaction or interaction with a new feature. For example, every time a biometric card is used, it gets logged. The system compares total eligible users, those who received the feature, with the actual usage data. In the context of MasterCard's fraud detection architecture, the false positive arises basically when the algorithm erroneously classifies the legitimate transaction as fraudulent, in the same way that Hertz's system did with their rental vehicle. So while this may appear to be a tolerable margin of error, it poses a critical issue for experience and the system credibility. And incorrectly declined transactions can lead to some dissatisfaction. You may have had these before. Operational disruptions. It may even result in you just deciding to close your account. But for MasterCard, whose value proposition is built on seamless and trusted transactions, maintaining an optimal balance between fraud prevention and user accessibility is really paramount. MasterCard employs a core tool from their supervised machine learning models known as the confusion matrix, and this construct allows organizations to assess not only whether predictions are correct, but the nature of those predictions and their errors across millions of transactions. The confusion matrix is a 2x2 classification evaluation table that maps the algorithmic predictions to the actual transaction that occurs, and it provides a granular breakdown of the model's behaviors. So think of this as if you've ever taken research methods. If you look at the type 1 and type 2 error, you have a type 1 error that occurs when you reject a true null hypothesis. So in fraud detection, you act as if a fraud occurred. You reject it. You reject the legitimacy of the transaction, but it didn't actually occur. So that's a type 1 error. You think that something happened, but it didn't actually happen. And a type 2 error is when you fail to reject false null hypothesis. In fraud detection, again, you act as if the transaction is legitimate, but it's actually fraud. The trade-off between type 1 and type 2 errors is central to tuning into how MasterCard's fraud model works. If you're too sensitive to the inconsistencies, you reduce type 2 errors and you annoy users with false positives. But if you're too lenient, if you're too flexible, you reduce type 1 errors and you let fraud through. Precision and recall can help quantify this balance. MasterCard has the confusion matrix. Every fraud gets compared against the ground truth. It's determined by the feedback and transaction investigation and chargeback data. These are computed using machine learning evaluation networks. Last thing is the net promoter score. This one's a little more human. It comes with consumer surveys. Usually survey data is aggregated and categorized as if you're 9 to 10, you're a promoter. If you're 7 to 8, you're passive. And if you're 0 to 6, you're a detractor. NPS score, or the net promoter score, is the percentage of promoters subtracted by the percentage of detractors. And so they correlate that NPS data with actual behavior. And they use a data fusion technique in which they link the survey responses that are de-identified to behavioral logs and looking for patterns like, did the promoters actually use the feature more? Did the detractors actually experience longer approval times? They use AI ML clustering to segment users and refine the future service adjustments. When Mastercard uses an AI ML clustering, it means that they apply unsupervised machine learning out to group users based on behavioral similarities without predefined labels. So people who make frequent small purchases late at night, okay, users that travel internationally a few times a year, merchants that experience similar fraud patterns. They detect these emerging fraud behaviors through these clusters before they become widespread. Also use the Gaussian mixture models. So think of clustering and big data processing like a banquet hall. Imagine Mastercard is hosting a massive banquet in a hall the size of a small country or small planet, and every guest there is a data point. There's billions of people. Some arrive in tuxedos, other people arrive in sweatpants. Some come with their people. Some are coming in alone, and the room is filled with motion and purchases and locations and devices and times of day and spending habits and travel patterns. But Mastercard doesn't have a real understanding of where everyone is specifically. No one said who belongs with whom. They call in a clustering team. And their clustering team is made up of the k-means and the db scans and the Gaussian mixture models. Mastercard can serve people differently. Their fraud risk is adjusted based on the table that they're at. They personalize features and alerts. They detect when someone is suddenly at the wrong table, like Captain Reese trying to blend in with the corporate travelers, for example. The banquet doesn't stop. Also, the room is constantly updating. There's shifts, and Mastercard learns about like who's there by your activity. So let's go back to the school teacher in Seattle who never buys energy drinks. Her history is basically using the MasterCards, all groceries. So bookstore visits, occasional takeout, a dinner. And then one day, her MasterCard is being used to buy 6 cases of the latest energy drink flavor at a gas station in Tampa. And the fraud detection system needs to decide who's Captain Reese. If it's a type 1 error, it's not Captain Reese in Tampa. It's actually Nancy visiting family and deciding to caffeinate her cousins. And the false positive is when the transaction is legitimate, but the system blocks it. In this case, the customer experience is what is lost. Annoyed and embarrassed and possibly distrusting of the card. And really, in scenario 2, the system allows the transaction to go through for the energy drinks, assuming that it's trying something new. But in reality, it's, quote, Captain Reese, not really a captain, by the way, using a gold MasterCard that he found at the Nashville airport to load up on these resaleable drinks that he can sell out of his rental car. False negative, okay, type 2 error. The fraudulent transaction slips through. And MasterCard, or the bank at least, will eat the cost and potentially open up the door for further issues. High precision means when we say it's fraud, we're usually right. It minimizes the false alarms or the type 1 errors. It emphasizes that we catch most of the actual fraud. We've minimized the fraud that we missed. So Mastercard's challenge is to decide, is Nancy buying energy drinks today really that weird? Or is it weird, but is it okay? The system learns from the context. Is she traveling? Has she used this gas station chain before? Did she use Face ID? In the late 2010s, they decide to amp up their security a little more. What they do is they introduce sonic branding. Let's start with the question of this. What does trust sound like? What does it sound like? It doesn't sound like a password. It doesn't sound like a PIN code. It doesn't really sound like silence necessarily either. In the late 2010s, MasterCard made a subtle, almost invisible change to its brand. It removed the name from its logo, first of all. The 2 interlocking red and yellow circles remain there, but the word Mastercard has disappeared, and in its place, something was added. A sound. Not a jingle, not an ad. A 3-second sonic logo designed to play at checkout terminals, mobile apps, and smart speakers all over the world. It's a soft chime, It's warm, it's tonal. They definitely audience tested that. Structured, but not pushy. It sounds kind of like, okay, you are welcome here. It's like the completion of it. It's like a handshake that you don't have to see. This is a signal that has not just sailed through, but has done so with all the security bells and whistles right in the Mastercard playground. The Sonic logo transformed the very essence of the approval, right? Instead of having Mastercard there, they now have a sound. Let's review what we've uncovered today. We began with the story of Captain Reese, a man who attempted to exploit a lost credit card to finance a luxury weekend in Tampa. What stopped him wasn't human intervention in this case. It was Mastercard's fraud detection system that was built on real-time pattern recognition. That system, operating in milliseconds, recognized an anomaly and made a judgment call that turned potential fraud into a decline charge. From there, we examined the magnetic stripe, that thin magnetic band, right, like a cassette tape that could be easily copied. And then we talked about the EMV chips. We went to Stockholm in 2005, where that chip and pin authentication was already a standard practice, where Sweden's payment environment demonstrated when infrastructure, user behavior, and institutional design are aligned, the trust can follow. And then in the US market, we saw how this change was forced by a crisis situation. The Heartland payment system breach in 2008 exposed the vulnerabilities of the mag stripe infrastructure and catalyzed the industry-wide reassessments. That breach, which compromised over 130 million card numbers altogether, revealed that traditional structures that were already in place were not sufficient. Between 2013 and 2015, there was finally a big liability shift that marked a major policy inflection, and the merchants who failed to adopt the chip-enabled terminals would now be assuming the liability. Mastercard played a key role in facilitating that transition, and the shift wasn't only technical, it represented a move toward a new type of authentication, a new logic of institutional responsibility as well. And this brought us into the more analysis and research driven part of the show that drive decision making, the confusion matrix, a foundational concept in machine learning and classification systems. And we discussed type 1 and type 2 errors. We looked at how MasterCard continuously is calibrating the trade-off to minimize disruption and without compromising security. That trade-off is captured in their risk score, and those scores are generated by algorithms running in their O'Fallon, Missouri data center, that high-security operational hub that sees billions of data points pass through daily. And then we ended with something that you could hear. We ended with Mastercard's Sonic brand identity. Introduced in the late 2010s and now standard practice, that 3-second audio signal functions as a kind of trust confirmation. It is a globally consistent, culturally adaptive, and sound to confirm that the transaction is complete. In the MasterCard system, trust is not always a gut feeling, actually. It's measurable. It's built from classification thresholds and behavioral modeling and encryption protocols and even sound design. In this episode, we followed that architecture from the magnetic stripe to machine learning, from crisis to a chime. This has been Decisions at the Fulcrum. I'm Dr. William Hoffman. Thank you for listening. See you along the way.